Hi, this is Down to Business with Sonia Thomas on Croydon Radio, and today's show is all about redundancy with respect, and we've got two great guests with us today, Elaine Hopkins and Annabel Kaye.
Hi, I'm Elaine Hopkins, also known as the Redundancy Crusader.
Hi, I'm Annabel Kaye.
Hi, welcome back. This is Sonia Thomas. You're listening to Croydon Radio, and today I'm with two fantastic guests in the studio with me, and also I don't know how to explain this, but we've got a videographer with us today as well, so we've been captured live. So this will go out hopefully very soon. You'll be able to see us in action as well as hear us on the radio. How exciting. And we've got with us, as I said earlier, Elaine Hopkins. Welcome, Elaine.
Thank you. Welcome, Sonia. Great to be here.
It's really nice to have you here. And Annabel as well. Welcome, Annabel.
Pleased to be here.
Okay, so I've got in the studio two great guests, Annabel Kaye, and Annabel is a real expert in employment law, and also Elaine, and Elaine Hopkins is known as AKA the Redundancy Crusader, and today we're going to be talking about redundancy with respect, and both my great guests are going to share some tips with us around how redundancy can be approached and managed in a way that's much more compassionate, and from a business point of view as well as from an individual's point of view. So before we kick off, I think it'd be really nice for people to know a little bit more about you. So Elaine, tell us a little bit about you and how you got into this kind of work.
Okay, well, it all started in June 2010 when I got made redundant for the first and only time in my corporate career. And then almost exactly a year later, I nearly died in a cycling accident.
Oh, dear.
On the pilgrim route in northern Spain. And I think when you're in that kind of situation, it tends to focus your thoughts on what really matters. And about 5 months after that, I had a bit of a light bulb moment, and I realised that I really wanted to find out what was going on with redundancy. And in fact, I have a very strong sense now that this is my vocation, this is what I'm here to do. And I just got curious because I'd worked for an employer that I revered, that had always treated me very well. I'd always thought if it came to redundancy, those things would apply. And actually they didn't. I got treated in a very brutal, make your mind up now or it will get worse later on kind of way.
Okay.
And I really didn't understand what was behind that. And I didn't understand that until I met Annabel, and she gave me the lowdown on what was really going on. All
right, so really a personal experience which really had a huge impact on you.
It did, yes.
Yeah. Oh dear. Okay, so I understand why you must be so passionate about what you do. So how do you work with people? How's this translated into a business for you?
Well, I was already a coach, so once I got curious about redundancy, I found some people who were experiencing redundancy and I started working with them. So my coaching became very much focused on that. So that carries on day to day. I also have a second strand, which is really what we're talking about today. I really want to help corporates do this necessary deed, if it is necessary, in a much more humane and compassionate way. They're the two things that I do.
Okay. And Annabel, welcome again. And I'm really going to ask you the same question. I know that you've had many, many years' experience in supporting businesses and business owners in, I suppose, tackling HR more effectively. So have you got involved in this work around redundancy?
This is my third recession, and this is the third time I've been involved in fairly large scale and repeat redundancies. The first time was in the 80s. And I've always tried to do it in a compassionate and communicative way, but I've always been aware of the fact that that's not the norm. To a degree, I think I was quite self-satisfied about how I did it, what my good practice was, until I sat down with Elaine about a year ago. And I realised that a lot of the stuff I take for granted about how things are done and what's going on were not being received in the way they were meant by the people who were on the wrong end of this. And I suddenly began to realise we were doing a lot of harm by not communicating clearly what was going on. And I've always been around with employment law, a lot of compliance issues. But I now feel that the compliance, the fear of employment law, the fear of being sued, is driving the behaviour to the point when it's almost inhuman in some organisations how long-serving employees are being treated.
Okay. And so I think from what you're both saying that you see a need that needs to be addressed. And some of the, I suppose the personal effects of redundancy, looking beyond just applying the law and complying with the law. There's more to it than that because of the effects on the individual. Okay, so I'm really interested to find out more. And before that, we're going to play another track. Hi, this is Sonia Thomas and you're listening to Croydon Radio, Down to Business, and today I've got two fantastic guests in the studio with me, Elaine Hopkins and Annabel Kaye, and they've just been telling us a little bit about their interest in supporting people manage redundancy more compassionately and why they feel there's a need for it, and a little bit about how they got into this kind of work. So here's an opportunity for us to find out a little bit more. So welcome back, Elaine. Welcome back, Annabel. And so let's find out a little bit more. So you talked a little bit, Elaine, about how you are offering some support to corporates.
Yes.
What do you do with corporates to help them manage this process a little bit better?
I think probably what I do is give them the perspective of what it feels like to be on the receiving end. As Annabel's said, we've both come to the conclusion that what's really driving it at the minute is compliance. So it's very much a tick box mentality. And what that means for the person on the receiving end is that they end up feeling that they're just a number. There's something to be dealt with quickly, got out of the organisation. That's one less number that has to be taken care of. And so what I try and do is say to corporates, if you imagine that you put yourself in the shoes of that person, that already gives you a very different perspective on it. So yes, I understand there are things that they have to do. They do have to tick the compliance boxes, but they can still tick them in a more compassionate way. And I think that really involves two things. One is accepting that it is an emotional experience for everyone involved. And why wouldn't it be? Because you can't be a human being and not experience emotion. And I also think they have to be prepared to actually have a conversation.
Right, okay.
And that's a conversation in the sense of there being options and possibilities. It's not, here's the information and this is what we're telling you. It's the sense of, OK, we've got this situation and let's actually have a proper dialogue. So it isn't closed down from the very beginning. And also I have a very fervent belief that redundancy shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. It's just, as the employment relationship goes along, there may be a narrowing of options, and redundancy may be one place where you end up. But I think if you as the employee are heading in that direction, I think you have a right to know that.
Right. Okay. So what would an employer do differently? If you had your way, if you could wave your magic wand and make it different.
If I could wave my magic wand, the outcome of somebody being made redundant is that they would be leaving an organisation with their self-esteem intact, with their head held high, and knowing that they were moving on to something else and that the employer was behind them in their efforts to do that. And that isn't something that takes vast amounts of money. It's just something that takes a different mindset. Right.
Yeah. So you'd maybe, from what you're saying, that what is it about it that's so difficult then? If it doesn't take a lot of money, why isn't it being done? Maybe. Yeah.
When legal advisors and HR specialists get hold of redundancy, they look at it as a multi-stage process. They start with something called consultation, which means to you and I having a conversation. But often managers and owners of firms don't want to sit down with their employee and go, you might or might not have a job next week. They find that quite painful themselves to do. So they'll often talk to me and say, I don't want to upset so-and-so, so can we miss out consultation? And can I not just make them redundant?
Right,
so
okay.
From a managerial point of view, you feel somehow that you're creating this upset because you're not having a 2 or 3 stage process, which is 2 or 3 opportunities to upset someone. From the individual's point of view, that is quite a brutal process, though. One day you've got a job and everything's fine, and 48 hours later you're out, they've zeroed your emails, they've cut off your phone, everything that goes with it. So the law requires consultation, but often we make consultation into a little rubber stamp. And it goes, it's Friday. I'm thinking you might be redundant on Monday. Have you got anything to say about that? No? Well, I'll see you Monday. It's not the spirit of consultation, but it's driven by the fear of saying something wrong. So to avoid saying something wrong, as we do in so many circumstances, from bereavement to separations, we say nothing at all. But if you can imagine going into work tomorrow and discovering that your boss had been thinking about making you redundant for a month, but now you've got 2 days to deal with that, that's an enormous trauma for most people. So it's juggling the personal with the compliance, takes a different mindset.
But why would an employer make that extra effort? What's in it for them? Because from what you're saying, people find it awkward and difficult in the first place. If you're an employer, you're fearful of saying the wrong thing. You want to stick to the rules, so to speak, so you're not sued. So why would you choose to do more in that consultation? Why is it? What's in it for you, basically?
The fear of being sued can of itself trigger being sued. And that's actually was Elaine's experience, which she can tell you about, because she actually had that response.
Really? Okay.
Yes. If anybody had ever said to me that I would ever be in the situation of threatening to sue my employer, I would have laughed. But I left that meeting and I had redundancy with respect running through my head. It was though Woody the Woodpecker had moved in. And I got outside, and the very first thing I did was phone up my brother for the number of a good employment lawyer.
I see.
And it absolutely wasn't about the money. But this was the organisation that had taught me how to respect myself, and they treated me disrespectfully. So for me, the money was just a proxy for the respect. And in fact, I've now interviewed over 100 people who experienced redundancy. They didn't all threaten to sue, but those who did, that was the driving factor.
I see.
It's just I'm not giving you permission to treat me like that.
That's very consistent with our experience in organising redundancy projects, that if that consultation process is a conversation, if it's a real dialogue, even though the person ultimately may lose their job, they are infinitely less liable to sue the company than they are if they are treated in a very brusque and tick-the-box fashion. The very thing employers fear, what if I say the wrong thing, leads them to saying nothing, leads them to the very thing they fear. It's ironic. It's a cycle of fear and despair. But it leaves companies feeling next time we make a redundancy, we're going to be even quicker and say less wrong things, because the last time they sued us. And of course, nobody gets anything out of that. People are damaged. Companies feel quite oppressed because they can't do what they need to do. There is another way.
Yeah. And also you I think, need to think about the reputation of your business as well, and what that does to the people that are left there that haven't been made redundant, what that does to their morale, and everything to do with their expectations about how they're going to be treated as well. I can see why it's a good investment of time for any business to consider how to manage the process for everybody well. Okay, so we've got a couple of shouts on the shout box. Say hi to Steve, who's listening in. Also to Jackie. I'm glad you're both enjoying the show. It's nice to hear you on the shout box. And for anybody who's listening online to Croydon Radio at croydonradio.com, if you click on the top button on the top menu on the front page, you'll see the word shout box. Click on there and you'll be able to not only listen to the show but also send us in any comments, any thoughts and any questions that you might have. That would be great if you can do that. We'll certainly do our best to read them out. So what we're going to do now is play another tune. We were talking about the importance of the consultation process, and I think we've got a couple of questions, at least one in the shout box, and this one's from Steve, and Steve's question is whether either Elaine or Annabel has any advice on how to deal with redundancy in terms of when you're filling out your CV or applying for a new job. How would you do that? Is that something you could answer, Elaine?
Yes, great question, Steve, because just recently I've been made very aware of how often people feel a sense of shame when they've been made redundant. And I'm aware that some employers can still have a sense of, oh, we don't want anybody who's been made redundant. And frankly, employers just need to wake up to the reality of the situation, because 2.7 million of us have been made redundant over the past 3 years. So there's absolutely no shame attached to it. In terms of a CV and prospective employers, I would just be very honest, because you don't want to be in the situation of fudging the truth and then being caught out. And I think probably the best thing to do is to actually frame it. So if you were made redundant as, say, one of 200 people, or you were made redundant for a particular reason because of your experience or things had changed, then I would just be very upfront about that and explain it. So I would just take control of it. When you've been made redundant, it doesn't help to carry on feeling that you're a victim of your ex-employer. You're not. You're in charge.
Yeah, and you said, what was that figure you gave again? How many people have been made redundant?
2.7 million over the past 3 years.
Yeah, that's a lot of people.
It is.
So you're not on your own.
No.
And I think sometimes you feel like that, don't you?
Yes.
So, yeah, and it's a kind of... I think if we think carefully, there's probably at least one or two people that we know that either have been made redundant themselves or are facing redundancy. And yeah, there is a stigma attached, isn't there, still?
Sadly, there is, yes.
Yeah, that people don't want to talk about. What do you think's behind that, Elaine? What's the concern about talking about it?
I think... I know this isn't the case, but when you're on the receiving end of it, there is almost a sense in which the way in which it's done has been designed to make you feel as badly about yourself as you possibly can. Particularly if people have a very strong sense of identity invested in their job. So if they are no longer doing that job, who are they? So these are things that really undermine your own sense of identity, your own sense of self-confidence. And I think for as long as people have it in their head that this is something that their employer has done to them, they're going to remain in that victim mode. So one of the things I always say to people is that we're not responsible for the fact that we were made redundant, unless, of course, we contributed to it in some way, but we absolutely are 100% responsible for how we react to it.
Yeah, it's a really good point, yeah. Because I think for me, the other thing that occurs to me as you're saying that is you can't forget all the fantastic work that you did prior to that and what you've achieved. You are still the same person with those skills and that potential, just because one employer doesn't recognise it.
Yes, and I think the other thing to realise is that employers often get it wrong. I mean, corporate history shows that. We only have to think of Gerald Ratner, Coca-Cola. They've all made the most horrendous cock-ups. So the fact that they've chosen to make you as an individual redundant doesn't mean that they're right.
Yeah.
And for as long as you're in that mindset of I'm the victim, then effectively all you're doing is giving your ex-employer your power.
Yeah. And I was going to ask Annabel, from kind of a employment kind of equal opportunities point of view, would your application be considered alongside everybody else's? It wouldn't be if you were to put on there that you've indicated that you've been made redundant, that wouldn't be any reason not to employ somebody, would there?
I think this fear is more in the mind of the individual making a job application than it is in the HR department's mind when they get one.
Yeah.
I think if you got made redundant 35 times in a row, people might start thinking, well, there's something very odd going on here. But there really isn't any shame. And I do know people who've been made redundant twice in the current recession, and it really is nothing to do with them in terms of their worth as an employee. Mm-hmm. I think because redundancy is technically a dismissal, it carries connotations of having done something bad. Yeah. But I always look at there are dismissals for being late or stealing a boss's car or whatever. Obviously,
it's a bit different.
It's a bit different. Redundancy means your employer can no longer afford to finance your post. You could have been the best, whatever it was, ever in the history of your profession, but if they ran out of money, they ran out of money. Yeah. And that doesn't necessarily reflect on you. It can be doubly traumatic if you were their finance director and they run out of money. There are all sorts of...
That might be an issue.
But for most people, it's nothing to do with you. I think what makes it worse is that when you're halving a workforce, if you're keeping half the employees and they're the same roles but just reducing the headcount, employers will very naturally try to keep the ones they feel are the best going forward. The strongest players, because they've got to manage with less people. But that can go wrong in the communication, and the people who are not in that group can feel as if their boss has said to them, you've never been any good. The communication again can go wrong. And I've sat down with people sometimes and said, well, actually, the role before was to do this in that way, and the role now is to do it in that way because there are less people. And the judgment is you're less likely to be in the top 10% of people doing that. That doesn't mean what you did wasn't good enough. But again, you have to have a dialogue with someone. You can't send them an email going, guess what? And expect them to walk out of that transaction with their dignity intact, can you?
No.
That's around clarity of selection and methods of selection and methods of communication, which oddly enough the law requires, but what the law doesn't require is for you to do that nicely or kindly.
I see,
It just requires you
to do it. Okay, so we've got another shout in the shout box. Hello, Jackie. And Jackie says, a little quotation from Jackie, I tend to think that unless people have got redundancy on their CV, they've not lived. They haven't really experienced real business and the world of work. So although it's painful, it's a sign that people have lived and experienced. So it's an interesting reframing there. And I'd say, I can't think of anybody that in any workplace that I've worked in where there hasn't been some redundancy. And sometimes you're lucky and you don't experience it, and sometimes you're unlucky. And I think I tend to agree with Jackie and also echo what you're saying about it. It's not a judgment on you per se. It's sometimes just there isn't enough money, and things have changed, and that's unfortunate. Okay, that's great. So thank you so much. Well, we're going to come back with Elaine, and we're going to come back with Annabel after the next track. Welcome back, and we're still with Elaine Hopkins and Annabel Kaye, and now I think it would be nice for people to know a little bit more about how to get in touch with you both and find out more about what you're doing. So, Elaine, if people wanted to know more about you, how could they find out more? How could they get in touch with you?
Okay, probably the best place to go is redundancywithrespect.com. which is a site that talks about both individuals experiencing redundancy and corporates who aspire to do it slightly differently, more respectfully. And there's a download available for each of those two groups. Loads of blogs, loads of information, loads of free stuff. And for those who are experiencing redundancy, I have also written a book aptly titled Redundancy Sucks.
Okay,
because it does, which is really designed to help people to get over the experience and get on with the rest of their life.
Okay, so if people wanted a copy of your book, how do they get hold of that?
It's on Amazon.
Okay.
And for anybody who's local, which I presume they are if they're listening to this, I also run a meet-up group in Wimbledon on the first Tuesday of every month.
Okay, so if people are not familiar with it, there's a website called Meetup, and you can go on there, and check out the times and dates, and you can come along.
They can.
Yeah, great. That sounds fantastic. And is there anything else you'd like to share with people around? Are you on Twitter or on
yes,
Facebook
they can
or anything?
Join me on any social media they choose.
Okay,
Twitter,
so you're
LinkedIn,
there.
Facebook, YouTube. I'm there.
Okay, so they just look up. Is it Redundancy Crusader or Elaine?
It's Redundancy Crusader on Facebook,
yeah.
And I think it's Elaine Hopkins everywhere else.
Great, okay. And if people visit the show page for this show, so you'd go onto the Croydon Radio website and look under My Name's Sonia Thomas, Down to Business, they'll see the show page. And if anybody didn't get the web addresses, Elaine's web address is on the show page, so you can click on the link and that will take you straight to Elaine's website. And how about you, Annabel? How would people find out more about you?
We have a webpage which is www.coffeeclatch.co.uk. That's with a K.
Okay.
K for coffee and K for Clatch. On that webpage there are free downloads for individuals at risk of redundancy, and there are also free teleseminars for bosses thinking of starting the redundancy process. And depending on when you listen to this, the next one either is the 26th of March or there'll be another one after that date if the podcast goes out later, where Elaine and I will be going through much more specific ideas for the bosses only than we can go through here when we've got a dual audience.
So those are, did you call them teleclasses or what?
Teleseminars. All you need is a phone.
So you can just listen in over the phone and
no special equipment.
Okay. So that's free for people?
Absolutely.
Wow, that's a good offer, isn't it? So people can visit your website and find out about those, and that's particularly useful for people who are running their business and they may be considering applying the redundancy within their business. So that's a fantastic offer. That's completely free. And is there any other way for people to get in touch with you on Facebook as well?
Yes, there is a Coffee Clatch page on Facebook, and I also have my own Twitter stream in my name, Annabel Kaye. Yeah. That's ANNABELKAYE. I'm thinking of running a competition for how many other ways there are to spell my name. And yes, I'm on LinkedIn and everywhere you'd expect to find me.
Right.
I'm noisy on social media.
So there's no excuse for not finding you, is there?
I
really?
Googled myself the other day, not something every respectable girl should do. And I was amazed, actually, how many places I actually do appear.
Right, so there's no excuse. People can get in contact with you, and I'd encourage anybody who wants that information, either as an individual or as a business owner, to take advantage of that free information and take advantage of both the resources offered by Elaine and by Annabel, and to check out Elaine's book, Redundancy Sucks. Redundancy Sucks. Okay, so fantastic. So I'd like to thank you very, very much indeed, Elaine and Annabel. And it's been great having you on the show today. And I'm sure the listeners have really appreciated your input. And now we're going to play another song. And this is a lively one to wake us up.
You very much. This is Schmelvis style.
Hi, this is Sonia Thomas and you're listening to Croydon Radio, Down to Business, and I hope you enjoyed our show today with Elaine Hopkins and Annabel Kaye, and we were talking about redundancy with respect, and I'm sure it's a really helpful programme for those people who have experienced or are in the process of experiencing redundancy. I do hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed it very much.